Welcome to Ordinary People Doing Extraordinary Things, the podcast show. I am your host, Carrie Roberts, and I have another wonderful guest on today, Miss April Rinne. Now, she is one of the 50 leading female futurists in the world. She has been a trusted advisor to companies like Airbnb, Nike, Intuit, and more. She has been a Harvard Law School graduate. She's traveled the world. She's also a certified yoga instructor and does handstands everywhere, which I love. And she is the author of the new book, Flux. Welcome, April. So excited to have you here today.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm delighted to be here.
So I want to start off with just defining, what does the word flux mean for those that don't know?
Yeah, I love this. Great question to kick off. Wow. The word flux, it's kind of fun to say, right? And I don't mean like flux you, there's all that kind of stuff. But flux is both a noun and a verb. And most people know it as a noun. It means continuous change, movement, fluctuation. So like the world is in flux right now, right? Flux is also a verb though. And as a verb, it means to learn to become fluid. And I love that juxtaposition because imagine something learning how to flux, to be fluid, to be nimble, to really know how to navigate all kinds of stuff that we know about and we don't know about, right? So it's great for navigating uncertainty. So the way I like to phrase it these days is that the world is in flux and we all need to learn how to flux to better navigate that change.
I like it. And I want to, before we kind of get into more of the kind of ideas in the book, I want to talk about you personally. As I was reading part of your book, you had this intense moment at age of 20. You're in college, you're getting ready to travel to do something, and your sister, who you don't talk to that often, calls you and says, April, are you sitting down? I have something to tell you. And at 20 years old, you hear your own sister tell you, hey, both of our parents have been killed in a car accident. And as I'm reading that, and I've heard you speak a little bit about this on other shows, I can't begin to imagine, I definitely don't want to imagine something like that happening. Can you take us back to when you're 20 years old and maybe that year of being 20, of what were your feelings, your emotions, your mental state, what's going on at that time?
Yeah. 20 is a really interesting age. And thank you for bringing this up. I'm really, it's not a happy situation, but I'm really happy to talk about it. I'm really excited and it fills me to be able to share my experience with others in a way that might help them. So the age of 20 is really interesting in that, I was away at college. I was actually overseas at the time. So I was old enough to know how to take care of myself day to day and get myself around and feed myself and that sort of thing. But at age 20, I was really pretty clueless in terms of how the world really works, my role in it. What am I going to do? How am I going to find meaning? How am I going to rebuild my family? What is my career? It's this kind of, when you think about your late teens, early 20s, I mean, all ages are times of growth. But that was one where I was old enough that I wasn't fully dependent on my parents, day-to-day survival, but I was very dependent on them as sounding boards, as kind of assuming they would be there to make my way through life. So it had a really interesting effect. And I do like to say that my journey to Flux, in retrospect, really was back then, many, many years ago, when, I kid you not, I mean, whatever I thought the future was going to be, it melted. Whatever version of the future, I at least thought it would have parents in it. I at least thought it would have sounding boards. And, if something really hard happened, I'd know who to call or where to go. And all of that just kind of vanished. And so it's interesting because many years later now, one of the ways I do often not tee it up, but when I think about it, I'm like, wow, what kind of started to happen to me at that time? When I was 20, I kind of had the equivalent of a midlife crisis. And why I say that is because the questions I was asking as a 20-year-old when my world had flipped upside down were so similar to the kinds of questions that I see people who are experiencing or have experienced some kind of midlife-ish crisis later on. What really matters? What is my meaning and purpose? And if I were to die tomorrow, what should I do today? And all of those sorts of things, that's what I dealt with at 20. And again, it's very bittersweet. I wish that hadn't happened. And yet, it forced me to grow and stretch and learn and try things that I never, ever would have done because my parents died. And those things I'm actually really grateful for.
Yeah, I can't, I think whenever someone close to us passes away, and you kind of talk about it in your book, this is the first funeral you had been to, and it's not one, it's two of the people you're closest to. You learn from them, and they've taught you how to explore the world. And that's so challenging. And I think, what's interesting is when we have stuff like that, we have so much anxiety about what could happen next. What could we have done? Will this happen to me? Will this happen again? How do I trust? I mean, were you feeling a lot of those things? And at that time, were there ways that you personally were able to kind of deal with it? Or was that something you kind of dealt with later on?
Yeah, no, I definitely had to start learning. I can't say that I mastered it straight away, but I had to learn it day to day, putting one foot in front of the other. So a couple things, you're absolutely right. And I do like to bring that up because it's not like my career has focused on grief and loss or anything like that, but I have found that everybody in some way, shape, or form has experienced either direct loss of a loved one, or it could be loss of a job or loss of things that we hold dear. And I think especially the last 12 to 18 months, there's individual grief and loss. There's also collective grief and loss. And so as I think back, it's interesting. So on the one hand, it very much became a question every day. What am I going to do? Mm-hmm. And there were weeks, months even, where I would lay in bed. And for quite a while, my initial thought waking up was, this is finally the day that I wake up and realize this was just a nightmare. None of this actually happened. Whew, that was quite the nightmare. I'm going to get up now. And every day it was a kind of, no, that happened and you need to face it. And so at that point, I knew that I had a choice. I could either throw the covers over my head and say, woe is me, crawl in a corner and life's been rough and that's that. But I knew that's not what I wanted. I mean, there's a world out there. There's life to be lived. I knew that's not what my parents would have wanted for me either. And so then it just became, I kid you not, it is as simple as you put one foot in front of the other. You have no idea how that day is going to play out, but you're going to give it your best shot. And so I started doing that again and again and again. And then some interesting things happened over that time as well. I mean, I will say, and yes, my situation was pretty extreme, but I've learned enough to say that one of a colleague, an inspiration to me in grief and loss, his name is David Kessler. The way he likes to put it is, the worst grief, the worst loss in the world is yours. So I'm not trying to equate mine with anyone else or whatnot. But what I started to learn is that in my own way, what I had been through, what I was going through was likely going to be one of the hardest things in my life. And so if more change came in the future, not that I wanted it, not that I was ready for it, right? But I was like, man, if I can get through this, I can get through almost anything. And it ended up, you start to get this little bit day by day confidence that you can weather a lot. And as you build that confidence, then you start realizing, oh, I've never thought about this the same way. Or like in my case, a lot of it was like my career. What should I do? And if I had followed the straight and narrow, go to college, get your degrees, climb the corporate ladder, like do what society expected me to, I could have done that. And, I say this respectfully. I also was like, you've got to be crazy. I might not be here tomorrow. What does the world need me to do today? And I created a very different professional path because I had this sense of finitude. So like finite time and what really matters and what doesn't. And this is everything from, relationship to money, relationship to other people, how you define success. I mean, all of that. And so again, I say that wasn't a coping mechanism at the beginning. Yeah. But as I peeled back the layers of that onion, I started to see things very, very differently in a way that I think overall, not that it served me well, just only that, but the way that I think a lot of humans can think through and learn to see a bit differently.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to, again, just, you having been through that tragedy and then the pandemic happens. I'm curious, what was your feeling? Were you like, I got this? Like, I've been through worse. I'm fine. Or were you like a lot of people, this is, oh my gosh, what do I do? Because at first we thought I was going to be 2 weeks. It's fine. And then it's still lingering here. How did you kind of deal with it, especially maybe those first 6 months, and continue to deal with it in this last year and a half?
Yeah. Oh, what a great question. Thank you. So on the one hand, well, I should also give a little context with the book. I've been working on the book like Flux, navigating constant change, right? This is not a pandemic book, or it's not a book about the pandemic. It's not a book that started in 2020. I've been working on it since 2018. However, when the pandemic hit, I was like, oh, world in flux, here we go. So on the one hand, and my publisher immediately was like, we gotta finish this, right? But also, and this is where, I mean, so much of what I'd learned from my parents' deaths, as well as just my theory of flux, if you will, and it's not a heavy-handed academic theory, it's just kind of the way I like to describe it, which is seeing all change, whether you wanted it or not, whether you expected it or not, as an opportunity to do things better. So not as a threat, but like, what am I supposed to learn here? And so for me, I was not concerned about, I guess, partly being a futurist. I'm busy every day mapping out different scenarios for how the future might go. Pandemic's been a possible future scenario for a very long time. I think a lot of us would say in retrospect, to some degree, we didn't see COVID coming, but if anybody thinks we weren't going to have a pandemic at some point, I think you've really not been looking at the full picture. So I was sort of like, okay, we need to start focusing on that scenario a bit more. And I wasn't afraid of, could I handle the uncertainty? And I think that's because of this like mental muscle that I've been grooving. But for me, the big change was lifestyle wise, in terms of no travel, how I did my business. It all flipped. And I had this kind of like, I know this might sound funny, but I think every person has their own version of this. For me, one of the scariest things was, can I actually stay put in one place and not go crazy? And I was so used to having, stimulation and being out with people. And this was just, I was like, am I going to shrivel up? Am I just going to not be able to come back to myself at some point? And so the greatest, I've had this conversation about silver linings quite a lot recently, where I know you don't want to talk about any silver linings with 2020. It was not a good year, and into 2021. But I think a lot of us, there is this sense of, we learned things we wouldn't have otherwise, and we grew in ways we might not have otherwise. And for me, certainly the pandemic, the silver lining of last year was being able to be in one place and finish the book. Never would have happened otherwise. And now I feel like this book, it's kind of, to some degree, it's my gift to humanity about how do we forge a brighter future that is going to have more change. Because that's the key. All the stuff I was writing about before 2020, it's still there. In some cases, it's just exacerbated. So, the future is more uncertainty, it's more change, it's more flux. And I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing. I'm not saying I want it or don't want it. I'm just sort of calling it out that we need to get much, much better collectively at how we think about and relate to change.
Yes, I agree. Again, we're seeing, like you said, not just the pandemic, we're seeing, innovation, we're seeing AI, we're seeing work change. I mean, everything is constantly changing, and it's changing faster than it was before. So we have to, as people say in therapy, first there's an awareness of it, and being accepting of that and going through it. And, through your book, you kind of have 8 different ones that you talk about, and we're going to touch on just a couple today. But one of them is about running slower. And I'd love for you to dive into this, but in terms of what you just said, and kind of what we've learned in the pandemic. And one of the things that I actually experienced that I thought was really great was, in a strange way, my relationships got deeper, because all the friends, where you're doing something, you're out. Well, now we're all home. So now you are like, hey, what are you doing? Let's chat. And we would have these deeper conversations, and in a way, and I felt so much more connected to my very close friends and my loved ones, because we were having these talks maybe we didn't have before, and being vulnerable and being open and really developing those relationships and, in a sense, slowing down. And it's something I've always loved and advocate for, but I think the pandemic really forced it to happen. And I really enjoyed that. So I'd love for you to talk about what run slower means, because your opposition to it is people are always like, run faster. Let's go somewhere quicker. Let's get there sooner. But you're suggesting the opposite in order to kind of deal with change. So what does that mean?
Oh, so good, Carrie. Thank you. So each of the 8 Flux superpowers, of which run slower is the first, each of them is, as I like to say, kind of, to some degree, I mean, they're all counterintuitive. Some are even contrarian, right? This goes against what we've been taught. And the way I like to tee it up is that society has given each of us a kind of script, a kind of narrative for not just how we should live our lives, but it describes the world we're expected to live in, right? And I think a lot of people, and again, the last year has just made this clearer, but it was there before. Now it's just there, I think, with more emphasis. A lot of people were going, my goodness, like the world I was taught I would live in, the things I was taught I should do for success, for meaning, for whatever, they're not really matching up with the world as I see it, right? And this is leading to unhappiness and obviously depression, anxiety, burnout, like all these different things, right? That are kind of epidemics in addition to a pandemic. And you start thinking, like, if these narratives, these scripts aren't serving us very well, and then change hits, and that's what often makes us go, wow, this really isn't working very well, it's a nudge for us to change. So the Flux Superpower run slower comes from that. So in a world where the pace of change is ever faster, think about what society tells us. When the pace of change quickens, what do you need to do? Run faster, just keep up. Run faster, keep up. Run faster, keep up. Now, I am a futurist, and I will tell you that the pace of change has never been as fast as it is today, and yet it is likely to never again be this slow. Now, if you pause and just let that sink in, it's kind of exciting, and it's also rather terrifying, right? Because think about what society is telling us. You just need to keep running faster. Now, what if I said to you and to me, right? I'm applying all of this to myself as well. I'm exhibit A in terms of the guinea pig. You're telling me that right now, however fast I'm running, I'm going to need to run faster tomorrow, and faster the day after that, and faster, and already today. I don't have enough hours in the day. I feel like I'm running too fast. I can't absorb everything. I'm not connected. I'm not that self-awareness that I'm going, hold it, this is backwards. So the superpower says that in a world with an ever faster pace of change, the way humans thrive is to slow your pace in order to be not just sustainable, but to actually appreciate and notice life as it's happening. So you'll notice when I say run slower, I did not say stop. I did not say do nothing. I did not say be lazy. I said slow down, because we all individually and collectively, the greatest risk we run is running straight past life. We're running so fast trying to get to the next thing, the next day, the next whatever. There goes life. I mean, and I don't want to sound morbid or like dramatic about that, but I think there's a lot of truth in that when we run ever faster, not only do our brains get hijacked into anxiety and nervousness and like freneticness, we also make poorer decisions. We're running so fast, we miss what really matters. We can't filter information anymore. So all of this, and it's fun because in that chapter, we go through what does it mean to slow down and how do you do it and what are the effects, both psychologically, emotionally, physically. And, when I bring this up with people, because initially they're like, that's not what I've been taught. Nope, I don't like that. Doesn't work. And then we walk through it and they're like, oh my gosh, you've just described my life. Right? So
Yes.
It depends, whether it's anxiety and burnout or whether it's just wanting to appreciate life, this ability to slow down sustainably. That's how you actually can make it through a long life that's actually a life worth living and enjoying and contributing to greater society.
Is there something that you've done recently where you've slowed down and noticed something and allowed you to enjoy and be present in the moment?
Yeah. For me, I mean, these superpowers, I like to say, they're not like a one and done quick fix. They're not something that you download one day and off you go. They are practices throughout life that I continue to work on, that I've been working on for years. So for me, yeah, I have examples, and I struggle with them too, right? I have this pressure, particularly writing and publishing a book, right? You can never get it all done. So you're running and running and running. But it's that sense of, I mean, there are many examples, but it's everything from, oftentimes, like, you'll drink your morning cup of coffee and you won't notice that you've drunk it.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden you're like, this is actually delicious coffee. I mean, it's something little like that. Or it's noticing that, we were talking about this earlier, with your relationships, slowing down long enough to have a meaningful conversation with one friend is so much more meaningful, valuable, helpful, nourishing, whatever, than 10 quick chats with friends that are just very surface, right? Now, you've actually, and I don't want to get into relationships, it's not about saving time, so to speak. But when you think about it, you've just saved time by slowing down. And there's all these they're fun, you get into like these sayings about slowing down is actually smoother, and going smoother is going faster. So you speed up by slowing down, you get more by doing less, all that kind of stuff, which, Flux riffs on that as well.
Yeah, I think in terms of relationship, whether it's personal or professional, I mean, I always talk about, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. When people say, how do you know this person, or how did you connect with them? It's like, oh, I've talked to them 6 times. I've had multiple conversations, and you start to get to know them. And it's the same with romantic relationships as well. It's like you said, it's that time spent, that attention, that I think we do miss, especially in a professional way too. We're trying to get more. We need more clients, more users, more whatever. Whereas if sometimes we take that time to really get to know a person or even a group of people, how much better of an organization can we be, or how much better of a product can we put out? So I love this one a lot, and I thank you for sharing that one. And along those lines, I wanted to say another one that really resonated with me personally, is the one where you say, no, you're enough. And the opposite is, I need to do more. And that's something that I have struggled with personally. And I think a lot of people do, because whether it's you feel you need to keep up, or whether it's you just have an expectation of yourself, or something else, there's this constant feeling like, oh, I need to be doing more. So can you talk about, again, this dynamic, and what this means, and how do we keep it when other people might say, no, you need to be doing more, you're not doing enough?
Yeah. Oh, I love this. And that's exactly where I was heading when you were talking about like the meetings. I thought, oh, and this is a great opportunity to say too, like just with regards to the superpowers as a whole, each and every one of them stands on its own. It's something you can practice just individually, and you can just read one chapter if you want and be done with the book, but they do enhance one another. So as you learn about one, you start seeing the others in a different way. You start grooving them, and Run Slower and Know You're Enough are like, they're like siblings. They're like kindred spirits, right? Because what you're talking about, I mean, you're spot on. So what's fascinating, and here's where I started looking at this, from the perspective of psychology, as well as the perspective of business and finance, as well as the perspective of society and pop culture. And you start realizing that we are, and, again, I hope I'm not over dramatizing, but today we are obsessed with more. We want more money. We want more cars and more houses and more loves and more likes and more followers and more power and more prestige and more. And I'm not saying that more is a bad thing per se, but I'm like, hold on, where does this drive for more come from? And is it actually making us better humans? And it's fascinating because society, and here I could go on a riff about consumerism and mass marketing and advertising and capitalism to some degree. I won't go into all those rabbit holes, but the way I would like to phrase it is, we have become obsessed with more, but we've forgotten about this concept of enough. Enough is contentedness. Enough is sufficiency. Enough is being able to thrive. And when you're looking at enough, anything that's more than enough is actually just excess. doesn't actually help you or others. Now, granted, you don't want less than enough. Less than enough is scarcity and not reaching your full potential. But here's the hook. The best way to put this is when we are constantly going after more, we will never find enough. And here, society, and I think in particular, mass marketing has done a really good job of convincing us that you are not enough. You never will be enough. You'll never earn enough, have enough, whatever. They need you to believe that because they need you to keep buying stuff. They need you to stay trapped in this cycle of never being enough. And yet, I'm sorry, you and I, every human on the planet has been enough ever since the day they were born, just showing up for who they are. And when you start from a point of enough, what's fascinating is you immediately begin to find abundance. So there's this kind of head fake. If you're after more, you're never going to find enough, and you're never candidly going to be happy or satisfied, fulfilled, or just be able to say, wow, what a gift this life is. But when you start from enough, you will immediately begin, and here I don't say more, you'll immediately begin to find abundance, and you'll immediately begin to see value in people and beauty in things that you hadn't seen before because you were so focused on, I'm not enough. So
yes, I love how you just express that. And yeah, I agree. I think the challenge is, like you said, it's like sometimes we understand things in theory, but in the moment it's really challenging. And I think again, if it's coming externally, from a workplace or a spouse or something like that, or it's coming internally, sometimes it's like, okay, you have this piece of you that's like, okay, I know that I'm doing enough or I am enough, but there's still this thing coming in. Do you have any suggestions of either how you've personally dealt with it or suggestions of how to deal with it, whether it's personally one-on-one or within an organization, if people are feeling something like this?
Yeah. And I realize I didn't totally address that. There is definitely an element of like peer pressure as well as societal pressure. I'm going to counter this by saying too, though, you're feeling this way, right? You're kind of like, I get it. I feel it. I'm feeling it. I can tell you there are so many people in this world feeling it and saying, wait a minute, it's not just me. Wait a minute, there's something I could do. Wait a minute, like it doesn't have to be this way. So what I'm getting at, it's not that like you snap your fingers and all of a sudden the peer pressure goes away. It is this sense, though, the way I like to frame Flux more broadly is, what are those things that ground you and root you and define you, like your values, that hold even when everything else changes? So what are the things that matter most to you? Because what's interesting is we want love in our life. We're not constantly hungry. I mean, if we're craving more and more and more love, you want to wonder about the love that you've already got. Is it the love that really sustains and nurtures you? Because when you've got enough of the things that matter, you're not craving more. And so it is kind of, and in fairness, I will admit there have been many times where I've talked to individuals and they've said, oh, I think my values are just kind of out of alignment with sometimes my group of friends or my partner or my colleagues. And that is actually really helpful in and of itself. It doesn't mean leave your partner and quit your job at all. It means start some of these conversations, because you might actually find that more people than you think are feeling the same way. But again, societally, we haven't been not allowed. These have been creeping, lingering phenomena like under the surface that we haven't talked about. But a lot of people are hungry to talk about. So one of the easiest things to do is just broach this conversation. A lot of times people think it's awkward or they don't want to, we don't talk about this kind of thing. It's like, exactly. We haven't been talking about it, which is how we've ended up in this mess that we're in.
Yes.
Right? So that's part of the solution. But there's a huge element of this, which is very much self-awareness and that sense of whose life do you want to live? Do you want to live your life according to the expectations and assumptions that others tell you you should live by? Or do you want to live by those expectations and assumptions that you set for yourself, that aren't driven by society or necessarily more, but are driven by what you believe will allow you to thrive in this world and show up as your best self. And for a lot of people, it's funny, those who are kind of obsessed with more, when they start thinking about their enough, they realize that they're actually, enough is a much closer target to hit.
Yes.
And when you have found your enough, or when you know you're enough, not only do you immediately start to see abundance, you also start to have a sense of relief, a kind of like, oh, I'm not constantly on this hamster wheel. And also a kind of peace, a kind of internal satisfaction that sounds trite to say enough is enough. But, this sense of, gosh, I'm not constantly going after some sort of more that other people set for me. I didn't set it. I just sort of went along with the program. But the program's not working very well. And I can do things, my way or better or whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I thank you for saying that. I think you're right. I think being able to be open and have those conversations, I do that a lot on this show. You start to realize like, wow, you aren't alone in feeling certain things. There are other people that either feel the same way or know someone else who does. And that sense of connection is such a huge part of humanity. Another thing that I've noticed with a lot of people, and I would definitely say a lot of people, probably in their 20s, just from my experience, there is this anxiety around what's going on globally. So we're not even talking about our own personal life. We're talking about, will the world be here? Because I'm seeing climate change. I'm seeing, the COVID, I can't leave my house. And this feeling of taking on the world and anxiousness at such a grandiose level. I mean, what is your suggestion in kind of dealing with that sort of change and anxiety? I assume other people have it too, but I've just noticed it a lot in kind of the younger 20-year-old generation recently.
Oh, for sure. And the way I look at it is the younger you skew, the younger you are, the more future you have ahead of you, and the more
Makes
future
sense.
you have to be really concerned about.
Mm-hmm.
And I do a lot of work, for example, the future of work. And, the future of work for somebody who's about to retire, not as threatening. I mean, maybe not interesting, but like not as threatening when they're like, well, Social Security and not that long to live. You're 20 and you're looking at, okay, somebody who's 20 today is easily expected to live at least into triple digits, right? That's crazy in and of itself. They're not maybe going to be working all of those years, but they're certainly going to be working longer than 65 if we're all now living to be centenarians. And they're going, how am I supposed to create a livelihood for myself that will last for the next 70 plus years? I mean, it's right. So there's a lot of agitation and anxiety, rightly so. And one of the things, Flux as a whole, what I like is I am able to tease it out. We talk about this concept of a flux mindset, right? The mindset that is grooved towards constant change, and then the superpowers and so forth. And the focus of the book is individual, but the concept and its resonance, relevance, impact also exists at the organizational level. So what does it mean for an organization to be fluxy and have a flux forward culture, right? The values that an organization holds and so forth, but then also collectively. I mean, and I think for me, I always say that climate is actually meta flux. It is the biggest example with the biggest impact of any kind of constant change that I can think of right now. And it is the first time known to mankind or humankind that we as a species actually have the ability to knowingly destroy ourselves. That is scary. That scares me, and I'm not in my 20s, right? If I were, and you're thinking, wow, how does all of this work? So I bring this up because it's not that there's one Flux superpower that tackles this particular issue, but each of the 8 does so with this exactly what you're describing very clearly on the line. And so, for example, if you think about either running slower or knowing you're enough, or another Flux superpower, which is be all the more human, which is looking at our relationship with technology vis-a-vis our relationships with other humans. All of these are looking at this. Just take run slower, right? Individually, we're burning out, right? It's exhausting to run ever faster. Collectively, planetarily, we're also burning up. When we are running ever faster, we are consuming ever more resources. We are not doing any favors for the planet. So if you think about it from that perspective, running slower for the planet also means giving the planet a shot at surviving and regenerating and so forth. Similarly, know you're enough. I love that we can kind of, you see how these cycle back on each other. But know you're enough. When you know you're enough, we know right now. Actually, interesting factoid, there's this thing called the Earth Overshoot Day. I don't know if you've heard of it, but every year there is a day. We know how much the Earth can sustain itself, basically like drawing down the resources. Every year we hit Earth Overshoot Day, and from that day forward, for the rest of the year, we are extracting resources from the planet that it can't replenish. And every year, Earth Overshoot Day gets earlier and earlier. And this year, Earth Overshoot Day was in late July, meaning that as a planet, collectively, we had consumed all of the resources that the Earth can possibly put back into the environment, and we're barely halfway through the year. So I bring this up because knowing you're enough, if each person were actually living within their band of enough, the Earth would have no problem sustaining itself. So again, it speaks to exactly what you're talking about. The book has a very uplifting message if we can embrace these superpowers. But if we can't, then in fairness, I share that anxiety that the 20-somethings have, because there isn't a guarantee that this all goes well or all goes to plan, but there's every single opportunity we can think of right now to right that ship, to start doing things differently, but doing them differently together. It's not going to be one person or two people doing it, but it also doesn't take everybody on the planet. I mean, it's fascinating when you get into how many people does it take to start effectuating a really big societal shift. It's not, as we know, it's not a majority. It's a dedicated, organized, small group of people that can actually be those catalysts for change, if you will.
Well, and I think that's interesting to know too, because I never thought about it that way. I think sometimes people feel like, okay, well, I'm just going to use something small. I recycle, you know what I mean? But I'm one person. So is that really doing anything? And then it feels like, oh, everybody needs to do everything. But okay, the people maybe someone talks to don't want to. And then you get back into this cycle of kind of that anxiousness and like, how do I deal with this change? I'm not sure what to do. So I think it's good to say, look, there's kind of actually a medium, it's not everyone, but it's also not just one person. But how do you maybe find those other people, or how do you kind of get other people to be using some of these superpowers that you're talking about, so that there can be a way that people feel more comfortable with this ever-changing world?
Well, that's kind of where I am right now in terms of there's a whole world out there to impact, and where do you start? It's like, and I don't want this to sound like it's not all about the book. There's a lot of good initiatives, people, program. Like there's so much incredible stuff happening in the world every day that you can get involved with. But for me, in terms of like my bigger goal, my meta goal is that more people, I mean, ultimately everybody, but start small, that we can adopt this flux mindset and strengthen these flux superpowers. Now we're still early into that, but that's how you get started, by, learning, picking it up, like testing it, talking to other people about it, sharing your ideas with them. There are lots of things that are kind of right at our fingertips, but the way that I like to frame it right now too is that I simply start with asking people like, what's changed most recently in your life that you love? And what has changed most recently that you don't like, that you hate, that you've had problems with? And you start catalyzing a series of conversations like that, which we, again, don't typically have. And all of a sudden you find that people don't just want to talk about stuff. They want to actually do something about it. And so then you go where that energy is. You sort of follow it through. So, admittedly, I've been on this journey for 25 plus years now around Flux, but I'm still early into the journey of what the book can become, certainly, and the community that can be built around it and so forth. But there was one other thing I wanted to mention. Oh, I remember what it is. One of the things, just as a kind of a shout out, not just to the superpowers, but to so much of what you and I are talking about here in terms of what humans are capable of, and yet what we've been taught we should think, we should strive for, what we can do and can't do, should do and shouldn't do, right? All of what we're talking about right now today, think about it. It doesn't require any piece of technology that we maybe have or maybe don't. It doesn't require any money that we may or may not have. This notion of learning how to run slower, this notion of knowing you're enough, being all the more human, like all of this, we have all of this the ability to do these things within ourselves. Now, society has done a really good job of telling us we're not enough. But I say to society, like, oh yeah, watch me. Like that's just not, it's just not accurate. And it doesn't require anything that I don't already have to know that I am enough. And so I bring this up because what I'm trying to do also with these superpowers and helping people groove that muscle around change and reframe their relationship to change is that it is so easily accessible to everyone, regardless of your age, regardless of your bank account, regardless of your profession. It is really accessible, but it does require that we step into what we can think of as our agency, our ability to affect change, our ability to take some responsibility, our ability to take action. And so I just wanted to put that out there too, because I think there are a lot of books out there that are like, you can figure this out if only you do X and Y and Z, and and it's part of a business model and so forth. And I'm just like, no, like there's so much of this wisdom that we've always had inside, and yet it's been, for a long time, it's been really buried by a lot of what society tells us.
Yes. So. I always say to, younger people that it's a myth that adults know what they're doing, because there's this idea at 22, I should know everything I want to do and where I'm going to be. I'm like, nobody knows.
No.
We have moments where we think we do and then we don't. And like, just kind of having that, again, like we've talked about, these vulnerable conversations, and, we all can figure things out. So I appreciate this so much. If people want to get the book or they want to learn more about anything we talked about, where's the best place to do that?
Oh, thank you. So the best place is fluxmindset.com. So you can find the book. I've tried to make a lot more information about the superpowers and other stuff and articles to read and all that on that site as well.
Perfect. And the last question I like to ask all my guests, although you've obviously said the word flux, so I'm going to challenge you to choose something else. What is one word or quote or mantra that you try to live by every single day?
Wow. I'm guessing you've probably had this one before too, but it is the mantra that I wake up with every day and go to bed with every day. And it is just gratitude. That gratitude is what brings joy and happiness, not the other way around. Like, I'm joyful because I'm grateful. I'm not grateful because I'm joyful. And so that's something, going back to my parents and kind of coming full circle, that the more change life throws at you, sometimes the more you lose, the more grateful you are, and the more you see the abundance of what you do have. So that is a mantra that I very much try to adhere to.
I love it. Well, thank you so much, April, for your insight, your enthusiasm, your passion for what you do. I truly enjoyed our conversation. I look forward to hearing more from you soon.
Thank you, Carrie. Likewise.